episode 13. I know that summer's been a little hit and miss, but we are back, and we are recording this episode, and it'll be coming out tomorrow morning, so it's great because as hot as this summer is, there's a lot of hot issues out there.
There's a lot of things going on right now. As it relates to this Delta ramping up, it's changing things. Honestly, I have to say, for all of you kids that are following Mr. Lyman on Twitter, Kevin got a little fussy this week. Kevin, you want to explain to the kids what the hell you did this week?
I'm a little cranky this week because I've been watching it, and I hear people that were talking about the Roaring 20s, and I know I've said what ended with the Roaring 20s was
the Great Depression.
Now, time has been condensed so far that I was saying, like, oh, okay, so we're going to have our Roaring 20s. Maybe it's going to last 12 months. Well, it lasted less than
weeks.
20 days.
Maybe
that. We got a couple months in there, and we're seeing everything was going wild.
I partied like a rock star during those 12 weeks, but I got mine in. I'm good for another year.
Yeah, I guess you're getting older. Like, you got a birthday, so happy birthday, Tony.
Thank you for my shirt. For those of you that can see my beautiful shirt, this is from Kevin and Fran. I look fabulous.
Yeah,
Thank you, Kevin.
So, it was interesting and how our industries was responding to me because there was a lot of, as typical in business.
Okay, well, let's get out there. What did you say?
I said there was a diversion of responsibility and that concerts are a privilege, not a right. That
I believe that's true.
To get this back under control. And it falls onto the promoters who are experts at putting on shows all these years. They have the staff that have been working 16, 18 months on COVID protocols to implement them.
Let's just say what the promoters don't want to hear, and that is everybody should be vaccinated before they're let in the door, and they should show proof. Now, there's going to be those people out there saying, well, you can fake those cards. So what? Fine. Just make sure that that's the rule they know going in.
Well, anyone who has, I don't know if you've heard about the cards being picked up coming in, the fake cards, but they all have misspellings. They have all the stuff in them. So it's like the fake cards have misspellings. So if we know how to read in America and spell, which is a challenge for a lot of people,
all right.
We might be able to catch a lot of those cards at the door.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for security when you just put that on the letterhead at going in, people knowing, look, and to make that mandated across promoters. This is an industry that's based on money, right? So there's that big conflict.
I said for 60 days, my thing was for 60 days to start with. 60 days, vaccine, tested, no exceptions. Wear a mask at shows or get thrown out. And someone goes, how are you going to enforce that?
How are you going to enforce masks?
Well, you get a little crew. You get some security people. And I always did this, and I'll tell you, Tony, sometimes when I had a wild crew at a show, I knew who was going to cause me problems. It was just you get that instinct. I'd throw them out in front of everyone within the first hour of the show, and everyone saw you were serious, and then you don't have to deal with them.
Look, I'm a hippie liberal, and I'm all for masks on shows, and I'm down with that. I love it. I'm okay. But there's a lot of people that are not going to be okay with that, and that's where they become down to, it's my choice.
So
and I've you know what's interesting
for
about
60 days?
Some of the bands are on either side of the fence. Bands are pulling out of shows for both reasons. Bands are pulling out because they say, look, if you're not going to mandate that they're vaccinated and they have masks, I'm out. And the other side of that is there are bands saying, if you make them wear masks, I'm out. So the power ultimately comes down to, I don't know, the promoter. You tell me, you're Kevin Lyman.
It comes down to the promoters. It does. Like if I was going into the studio with an artist, I wouldn't try to change his way he wrote a song or sing. People who run shows know what needs to get done. Bottom line, look at what's going on with schools. I mean, literally in the last, schools went back to session last week. They're shutting down all over again. We don't want that to happen.
No.
We don't want that to happen.
My kid just went back, and the worst thing that could happen is 2 or 3 weeks from now he's back at home.
Oh,
that would just suck.
The mental health of our children and much of our society is on the brink due to what's going on. And as we did rush back to some sort of a normalcy, which takes an adjustment, to pull that out from people again, I'm worried.
And, I recognize that we're L.A., we're kind of living in the bubble in ourselves and all that, and other people are not seeing this as a big a deal as we're. But no, it is. It's going to get there. It's going to get to a point, where it really gets hard. These kids under 12 can't get vaccinated. And when they really start getting hurt over this, that's when everybody's going to straighten up and fly right.
They're
already
say
started.
It's my freedom. But their freedom is infringing on kids that don't have a choice right now.
It's
so
a
we're
fine
going to
line.
see. I mean, it's a tough time. But there was a really good time in my life that we're going to focus on right now.
The good old days.
I was so happy that we were able to have Gary Tovar, our guest,
Oh my God.
here in the backyard. You'd never met Gary.
Dude, he's a trip. I love Gary.
Oh, yeah, you met Gary, and I mean, I always say that we had a lot of bad examples in this business to learn from, but we always pick something up. And I always say Gary Tovar was one of those mentors of mine in the sense of, I always tell people, Paul Tollett, who's going to be a guest on our show today,
Right.
I was going to school with him, and he's eventually went on to run Goldenvoice and create Coachella.
Right.
Myself, who created the longest running touring festival in history, what was connected there? Now, we knew each other, but what was connected was our relationship with Gary Tovar. We all grew up in the Pomona Valley, and we're going to roll into this.
Oh, you met Paul. Oh,
we went to school. We went to Cal Poly
That's
Pomona.
Crazy.
And then, Circular, we ended up both involved with Goldenvoice. And I knew Paul when I was putting on stuff for the ski teams and stuff out there. So Paul Tollett, great guest, going to be on today. Going to have fun because Greg Graffin, and maybe Greg Graffin would be smart enough because I don't know if you know, Greg Graffin is a professor. He's been a professor at university, so he might be smart enough to figure out what to do with shows. So. But Greg has always been someone, and I just remember some of those moments. I did many, many shows with Bad Religion, and I couldn't get him to do it, but he used to have the best Gary Tovar impression. Like he could like duplicate the impression. He wouldn't do it on the show. And then I brought in two people that you wouldn't maybe suspect when you first met them that they were involved in such a big punk rock company, Bryan Meckelborg and Ann Meckelborg. When you see them, you're going to be like, wait, they were in the middle of the whole punk rock music scene? And they were an integral part of the growth of Goldenvoice.
I think what's amazing about this interview with Gary and going forward is that you say this is a punk rock company, but there's a whole generation of us beyond that don't see Goldenvoice as a punk rock company. We see it as a much bigger, inclusive, encompassing thing.
As part of AEG now.
AEG now, yeah.
You know, AEG. Ultimately, everyone thinks Goldenvoice was like a Los Angeles company, Tony. But actually, Goldenvoice started up in Santa Barbara.
Really?
Yeah, it started up in Santa Barbara. And, you know, Gary was doing shows up there at a place called La Casa de la Raza. And he kind of was working that community up there. So before he came into the LA market, he was doing shows in Santa Barbara. And this is where he, you know, kind of met people that we're going to meet later in the show, and they became part of Goldenvoice.
Right.
And expanded into Los Angeles from there.
I started in Santa Barbara with TSOL. That was December of '81. It will be 40 years this December. Oh, it's the only hall I could find. It is a Mexican community center, and it's got all the Aztec sun in the, you know, the calendar in the back, and it's got a lot of murals inside, and it was good. Low ceiling, but we managed it. We did a lot of good shows there.
So Gary, you know, is in Santa Barbara. He's got some of this, you know, he's got his other business, but this is starting to become a real business. So Gary had to, you know, when you've got a business, you got to start hiring people. And some of those early hires you wouldn't think, because you would think that you would go into your community, find some punk rock people to work on your shows.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you know, Gary met, you know, talks about, you know, meeting Bryan Meckelborg.
Bryan was my beard. And what we would do is Bryan liked to talk to police, you know, so I said, hey, and I was already doing something illegally still, right? I've been a little shy around police. I respect the police, but I was doing illegal stuff, so I really didn't want to talk to him. So Bryan was perfect. He was also, I wanted somebody who could go talk to a fire marshal instead of some guy in a mohawk, right? We can do these shows, and we don't always have to. You can have people of all ilks involved.
When I checked in with Bryan, he was actually on his way out to drop in some radios for Insomniac show that was going on, and I caught up with Bryan on how he met Gary.
So I joined a Nautilus. It was not even Gold. This was way back Nautilus. Remember Nautilus gyms, 70s or 80s? They were like the hot thing. So I joined Nautilus with my own money. I was like, you know, I was the big guy, going to go, you know, be a water polo stud. And so I'm there working out, and this guy comes up to me, and you know, Gary, he was kind of hyper, ADD. So I'm watching him work out, you know, he like lifts 3 weights and runs over to another machine and lifts 2 weights and then goes back to the other machine. And like, I'm like kind of cracking up, and he starts talking to me and hey, you know, what do you listen to? Where do you go to school? What's going on? And I didn't know if he was hitting on me, if it was a gay thing or what. It was, I was cracking up like, who is this guy? And Gary always had so much energy and so much passion for what he was doing. And he's telling me I'm doing a show and put on a concert here in town. And, you know, and so the bottom line was, you know, he's all, can you help me put these flyers up at your high school? And I was like, yeah, well, you know, whatever, dude. I was still real skeptical, but I saw the flyer and a bunch of people had posted it. It's great. It was the skeleton hanging, you know, La Casa de la Raza, TSOL. And he gave me a stack of them, and he says, I'll give you $10 an hour. And he's like, it should take you 4 hours. He gave me $40. So I got $40 cash and this big stack of flyers, and I go home and, you know, my brother goes, fuck, you got the money, throw the flyers in the trash and let's go drink, you know? I said, no, you know, I want to check this out. So I did it. I hung up all the flyers around school on Sunday night. I go back to school Monday morning, and I'm watching people take down the flyer and read it. I'm watching the administration try and pull them all down because they're pissed. And so I go back to the gym. I run into Gary again, and I said, hey, I put up those flyers. And he goes, oh, yeah, good job. And I said, it was pretty cool. I said, it kind of pissed off the administration. I heard they were looking at who did it. And, you know, I heard through the grapevine. And I said, you know, there's 2 more high schools in town, Gary. I said, you want me to do those too? And we got to talking. He gave me flyers. And that's how we met. I said, well, you know, now that I've done this, I saw him again like the next week. I said, hey, can I come to the show? He said, yeah. Went down to the show, and then it was all over. I was hooked from then on.
Gary was kind of like pulling in people to deal with things that he didn't want to necessarily do because he had another business. So he just wanted to kind of cruise. So,
right.
But Bryan has always been like, he saw an opportunity here. So he saw an opportunity, and Meckelborg, who we're going to hear how she got involved with Goldenvoice, is now a paralegal for the Grammys.
I mean, my story with Gary was that, you know, Bryan and Gary met at the Gold's Gym in Santa Barbara. Bryan was like 17. I was 18 at the time. Bryan and Gary did a show and didn't have anyone to cover the door. And I don't know why Bryan asked me, and I think I had a free night, but I was not like, I didn't know anything about punk. I was Kenny Loggins and I was James Taylor and, you know, the Eagles. That was my, you know, that's what I went to go see. And so when he said that, and then I'm like, well, why would I want to do this? And Gary, you know, Bryan goes, well, Gary's paying really well. He'll pay you $300 to be at the door and take the money. And I'm like, all right, I'll do that.
That's a lot of money. You know, that's a lot of money for a door person in 1983.
80, earlier. This is probably 80. So we're talking, you know, that, you know, Ann was there, and Ann was a member of a sorority and doing all these things.
God,
and
Gary had the money.
So now he had it set up. And he had the front person. If you see Ann, she looks very much like she did back then. She's very straight, buttoned up, kind of fun.
Gary's
you know,
not a dumb guy.
And, so then all of a sudden it was like Gary was bringing these bands over. He was funding their flights to come from the UK and things. And he started. So you got to figure Bryan's about 17, 18 years old. And Gary starts to bring these bands over, and they start doing shows in other cities that he brings them over. And somehow Gary's like the co-promoter of these shows.
Right.
And, you know, Bryan had an interesting thing because all of a sudden he's 17 and he's doing this.
There was one time when I flew up to San Francisco and settled a show at, I think it was On Stage with the guy up there. Gary says, yeah, I need you to fly up there and collect our cut. He says, fly up there and collect our share of the door and come home. And at that time, my parents didn't trust me to borrow the car, you know, and Gary is flying me to go settle shows in another city. I actually had to I was 19 or 20 at the time. I had to get my mom to write me a letter so I could rent the car when I landed in San Francisco.
That's right.
Because I wasn't old enough to rent a car.
Right.
And so that was like, Gary was, like you say, he would give you that authority. And you're right. He flat out told me later, you're the front guy, you know, clean cut. No ink, no holes was always my joke in the you know, in talking with the bands. And he says, yeah, I need you to go out front, talk to the cops, need you to to be the straight guy on this. And
even the thought of somebody taking a bunch of flyers in a high school today, in this day and age, for a rock show, does that even happen today? Not to mention sending a 17-year-old to go and collect the door. I mean, it's just a different time.
I think in some ways, though, you know, that sense of flyers, I see it down at USC campus. I tell my students, you've got to put it up to drill at home. Drill at home, put it by the bathrooms, put it by, just because with social media, it flashes through. We always thought that was just going to be the cure-all. Everyone would buy it. Social media sells everything.
Right.
But I always say, if you're going to do something, and they do shows, a lot of my students put on their own shows, put it up in the bathrooms, put it on the walls, just so it reinforces. And Gary was great at that. You would see those flyers, you know, you could just see him walking on campus in a skeleton at that point,
right.
You know, disrupting society. But, you know, all of a sudden, you know, it was like they're doing these shows at La Casa de la Raza. Now, this is a youth center. This is where they mold youthful minds. And Gary realized that Ann had a specialty.
I stood on the steps with a table and a shoebox and collected $6 from a lot of punk rock kids, you know, and most of them coming with change and stuff. And the first time I met Gary was the first time I settled the show with him. You know, at the end of the night, I came in the back and had all this cash in a drawer. He had never even met me. And I just had taken all the money. Like, so we went and did it all. And, you know, and twice I had to talk to the cops that came up and asked how many tickets we sold and if we were oversold. And Gary was like in the back and saw that and was like sold. At that time, my face and my being at the front door changed his world or something. You know, it was like, okay, she can talk to the cops and they'll go away. You know, they won't hassle me, because he was in the back, stoned. So it was, you know.
All of these pawns in my positions doing their duty while I sit in the back and get stoned. Gary was a smart guy.
Gary is one of the smartest people I've ever met, really. He really is, you know. But he was also, you know, being smart in business is one thing, but it's also being, you know, good with people. And Bryan touched on that early on.
But Gary would just be buttonholing kids. He was just the master at that. He would go out and he'd just go, you know, what do you listen to? What do you like to listen to? What do you want to see next week? You know, what do you think of this band? What do you think of that band? He was always doing his own market research and polling, you know, long before those terms were ever sort of in use. You know, he was that guy out there doing that and getting a feel for what was going on. And like you say, Paul and Rick and Carrie and Jolly, and he surrounded himself with people that knew their segments of the genre, you know, the different genres, and was always just absorbing that. And the one time he and Bidé took that trip to Europe and were over there for like a month just seeing bands and plotting and planning which ones to bring over. So he was always sort of the master at that and really doing a lot of that sort of one-to-one market research personally, you know. It reminded me a little of the stories you hear about Bill Graham doing that. Was just always out talking to people, figuring out what to do next and what people wanted to hear.
My experience with him when we interviewed him was absolutely that. Like, he was socially just on, very keen, and was here talking to us and very aware. Now, this isn't mutually exclusive when running businesses, right? I know people that run very big businesses that are almost on the spectrum in some cases. But I think what he had to do to start Goldenvoice and to juggle some of the other things that he was doing in his life, he had to be very keen and aware of what other people were thinking and how to work within that environment.
I like to stir the pot a little bit. I enjoy, and I did it other ways as well in my other businesses. When I got into when I saw the punk rock music going on, I said, wow, this is really a good pot stirrer. And I think we need to, I saw it not being serviced. I saw it being substandard. Nobody had any money. And you know what? I can understand that, because it wasn't really a good business to put money into, because there was a lot of destruction, and it was still a cult, and I was dealing with a lot of kids that weren't even old enough to have a job. So I was like, I was sort of like you know how families have 10, 15 year separation between kids, because a woman can have a kid for, 25, 30 years. I wasn't quite old enough to be their father, but I was mostly old enough to be like a way older brother. So I had, in a way, I was a babysitter. In the sense is, I had to take care of these people because it was very dangerous. I was doing some underground things, and even my underground friends who you think would be more enlightened, they were like, they were just totally appalled at punk rock. And I said, wow. I said to myself, these guys are like our parents treated us. You're supposed to, if you're an enlightened person, you're supposed to give something a chance, at least the way I look at it. And I found it fascinating, and I also found that they were just trying to express themselves. And I thought I wanted to raise the platform, create an even feel that they would have sound, lights, a place to go, close the door, don't hurt yourself, slam dance, do that if you, whatever. Try not to hurt yourself and try to be good and have a good time. I started in November of '83 with that series, November 25th, and I figured I had 2 good years. Because you see, punk rock is like a shooting star. I knew at its peak that it wasn't gonna last a long time. I gave it 2 years. The crowd was getting rowdy. It was all dudes. Girls stopped going. They didn't want to put up with a shit like that, right? I mean, so, and then I still did Fenders, but Fenders was Fenders was less than half the size. Less than half the size. Well, the market had shrunk from my philosophy always was, and I know I was just guessing, I always thought there was about 10,000 punks in Southern California, from San Diego to Santa Barbara, okay? It was a cult. That's why people that went to these shows, they're special.
He used to always find unique ways to do shows, and one of those unique ways revolved around the Olympics in L.A.
I first did the Olympic in '82, July 17th with Black Flag. Then I did in '83. I was coming into L.A. slowly. In '82, I did some shows. In '83, I expanded. I had 3, in '83, I had 3 major riots. January 8th, I had SIR, the old SIR on Sunset, and that was Hollywood knows how to handle riots. It wasn't quite so bad. They just chased the kids down the street.
Because the police during that time, you got to realize, it was like real government crackdown. It's like, you think right now, sometimes you see what's going on with the riots, but the police in L.A. hated punkers.
It's the usual story. SR was on Sunset, and whenever you have punks congregating on the sidewalk in the front, it's going to draw police. So they came, and, Jack told everybody to sit down like John Lennon and give peace a chance and all that. Anyway, it was a minor riot, though. It wasn't so bad. Then in February, the next month, we had a show moved from Devonshire Downs. I was co-promoting with BYO. It was The Exploited in at Devonshire Downs, which they canceled because somebody spray painted on the outside and we had to move it to a place a third of the size in Huntington Park called Mendiola's. That one, the cops were driving on the sidewalk, getting ready to run over. That was in February of '83.
Hundreds of angry punk rockers rioted in Huntington, California Saturday. The rioters were angered at the overbooking of a suburban Los Angeles concert hall designed to accommodate 450 people. As many as 200 people were turned away from the hall. The punk rock fans went on an hour-long rampage. The rioters are reported to have done $25,000 damage to businesses and a church before officers managed to quell the disturbance. 41 people, most of them juveniles, were arrested and 10 law officers were hurt.
There was only one way in, and it was going upstairs, and everybody, with cops chased everybody upstairs. I was pulling people out who couldn't get through the door. I remember I pulled this one girl out. She was I don't know what was gonna happen because the stairs were people starting to back down the stairs, falling back down. I gave it a big yank and pulled her out. And that one was bad. I could talk more, but I'll go to the third one, which was in June. So here we are, January, February, June. We're not even half the year's not gone. I've got three, that was Wilmington. And well, that's funny because, well, maybe it isn't so funny, but it's funny. We did a flyer that said storming the docks because it was in Wilmington. So the flyer said storming the docks. And the Pedro cops got pretty crazy. There was people hanging from the chandeliers, and it was really wild. Not quite as bad as Mendiola's, but close. That Wilmington show, it totally wrecked. It was a Longshoremen's Union Hall, and they totally wrecked the whole place up, right? For the riot, everybody. So I talked to the lady on Saturday morning. The gig was on Friday, and I told her, you take a couple hours, tell me how much damage there is, and I'll bring you the money over right away. So I was going to make good money on this one because it was a big hall. All my profits went, and maybe a little more, I took the lady $9,000. And she was like, oh, thank you. She was going to get all new stuff, which is good. And the cops call her on Monday, right? Because they didn't work over the week, whatever. They called her on Monday, and she already had the money on Saturday. And they asked her, do you want me to arrest Mr. Tovar? And she goes, oh, no, he came, and he was so nice, and he gave us cash, and he paid for everything. We're getting all new stuff. When you do something, if you can do it and take care and not ruin people's lives, that's a full-service promoter. I didn't make any money, but it was okay. I don't know what they were going to do to me, but I don't know what they could do to me. But I had money, and it ensured that things got taken care of. There was nobody who liked punk rock that was willing. I was like the one of the fat ladies in opera. One of them is a patron of the arts, and the other one's a singer, right? They're the two fat ladies. I was like the patron of the arts for punk. I mean, I wanted to keep going. It got to be a mini obsession, actually. I didn't want these big promoters at the end taking away the little tiny bit I had.
You know, when we first started doing these shows, you talked about how you started with the Warped Tour and how it eventually grew into this monster behemoth thing. And the first show, I don't even think you were selling hot dogs or just hot dogs and water. Gary had a similar experience of having this, and he heard, you know, through Hard Knocks, learned how to go that.
But it's pretty common knowledge at this point. But Gary was juggling 2 businesses at once. You know, he was making money from one business to fuel his passion for punk rock. You know, it is well known that he was in the marijuana trade.
Right.
You know, back then, you only sold tickets. You know, the tickets. You didn't have multiple income sources like we did now, where you have
Like
food and
sponsors
and food and beverage,
merch.
you know, stuff like that. But this is where Gary kind of, you know, picked up on that early on.
When I did things, we had no food and beverages. We had no alcohol. We had no sponsors. Even though I like Coachella does a great job of keeping it low key on the sponsors. I think that's something to be said. It's a different ball game. We tried to get sponsors at the end, like I told you, in '88. We asked Vans. They wouldn't touch us. They weren't ready for it yet. See, we were, in some ways it's good. In some ways it's bad. We were way ahead of the curve. Instead of it being paid for by alcohol, beverages, admissions, or sponsors, marijuana paid for that. No, I mean, basically that's what basically that was it. Marijuana paid for subsidized punk rock.
I guess the closest connection that I could figure out between, you know, maybe the finances of funding some of these shows, which were just money you didn't some
Right.
was where did the name Goldenvoice come from?
There was 2 types of marijuana in the early marijuana days, which was the early '70s. There was a marijuana called elephant ganj. They said when you smoked elephant ganj, it was like an elephant stepped on you. Then, because it was really, you know, and then there was Goldenvoice ganja. They said when you smoked Goldenvoice, it was like the angels sang to you in a golden voice.
That is hilarious.
So I said, that's it, I'll name it Gold, because otherwise the company might be named Elephant.
That's great. What a beautiful name. I had no idea that was, you know, Goldenvoice has gone on to become this big company with Coachella and all these different events all over. I had no idea it was named after a strain of pot that made you hear the angels sing. That's kind of cool.
Sing, which kind of blends perfect with music.
Yeah.
You know, but Gary kept it very separate. His life's very separate. So I asked Ann if she knew what he, you know, what Gary was up to when she went to work for him.
And I knew he smoked a lot of pot, but that didn't connect to me. Like, I didn't make that connection for a lot of years. I didn't care really, but for a lot of years, I did not make the connection until I went to his house in Laguna Beach. And this was after multiple years. We were down for a bunch of shows, spent the night there, walked into his garage, and he had like a 3-car garage in this big, beautiful home in Laguna Beach. I don't know if he owned it or leased it or whatever. And it was filled with trash cans that were filled with pot. And I was like, all of these? And that's when I realized that this was a whole different thing.
Whoops.
So didn't change anything. I kept working for him, but you know.
This was the time of Cheech and Chong.
Right.
This was the time where every pot smoking thing was like some hippie that had just come out of Woodstock.
I cut my hair because I didn't want to get noticed. And lo and behold, I lit the joint, and somebody didn't see who lit it, right? I remember the guy that had it, like, say, over here. He was going, you know, and I knew that just then, society was so cut and dry then that if you had short hair, you could fool them. Now, later on in the 80s, they suspected everybody. But I got away with this in the early 70s, all the way through the 70s. If you didn't look like a hippie, you weren't involved in marijuana.
Different time.
Different time. Gary was always clean cut guy, drive a nice car. He was cool. Got to work with many, many bands and everything, and it was great that I was able to get a hold of Greg Graffin of Bad Religion. He's been lead singer. He's also a professor,
right? Yeah, he's so good.
And a professor. He's great, and I really liked this little getting to catch up with him about interacting with Gary.
So he did a lot of shows for Gary, yeah?
Oh my God, Bad Religion. If I have to think, not only the shows but like that I was involved, Bad Religion would be top 5 shows that I ever was working or involved with, probably.
And then you brought them along, of course, as a staple of Warped Tour, and that's really cool. And this is where it all started.
I always think Bad Religion was one of those bands that if you really listen to the lyrics and not worry about that punk rock gang beating you up that night, there was a lot of intelligence spoken by them.
In there. Even
there was a lot coming out of that band. And to be honest, it was like out in the sunshine, you could listen to the lyrics. So I always felt like, wow, there's a lot of really important stuff, and which they still put out great stuff that's very relevant and very timely, and usually has an intellectual, not like F the government, but hey, man, at least see what's going on with this government or understand what's going on. So, it was interesting because, I did ask everyone, did you have any idea what Gary was doing during this time?
Gary kind of scared me just because I didn't really know, if he was angry or happy in my presence, because he was really pretty high strung and really enthusiastic. And I thought, I didn't want to piss him off because I really enjoyed the fact that he gave us so many opportunities to play at his venues. But, as we got to know each other more through the years, he would always say, Greg, you guys are always welcome. And I remember one interaction when the Circle Jerks played. I think, Kevin, you were probably at that show because you were being stage manager at Fenders at that time. And, Keith was being Keith. And, Hetson was sort of, I don't know if he was a double agent at that time or not. I don't know if he was playing in Bad Religion or not, but we had just come off stage and Circle Jerks were headlining. And then we waited around to settle up. And you must have been part of the meeting because you were always there when settlement came. And Keith was saying something like, it was a great show if it was, but we shouldn't have Bad Religion playing in front of us all the time. And what he was really saying was like, Bad Religion brings in too many of their own fans. So really we should split the bill or have Bad Religion headline their own shows. And Gary, of course, overheard this and he got in Keith's face and he's like, no, Keith, you're wrong, Keith. You don't ever underestimate Bad Religion. Don't ever underestimate Bad Religion. So from that day forward, that became our motto in the band. It became a rallying cry. Don't ever underestimate Bad Religion.
Greg's got a great imitation of him.
Yeah, oh yeah, it goes real deep.
He sounds like Gary Tovar.
Oh
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I asked Greg, what beyond that whole thing of don't underestimate Bad Religion in business.
No, it's
that
great.
They drew tickets. Gary had a lot of respect for that band, and Greg kind of, highlighted that.
I think that's why Gary and I got along so well. He knew that I was completely naive about that world. He knew I had no interest in that world. And that meant we could just relate to each other based on, more, I guess, business of music. And I really think Gary Tovar loved Bad Religion. And that was like, that meant something to me.
And, I can sense his passion, despite the business end of it, despite the gigs he had to do, the trends, the market he was looking at. Gary loved the music.
A music fan.
He was a huge fan. He was just, when he talked about these bands, he was intense. Oh, and then when we had this show, whatever it was, he was just so excited.
And I think, that was really kind of a time that, he was juggling two worlds. When you run a business, you have to hire the right people here and there. And he now had Bryan, he had Ann. They were coming down into the LA market with him. Their shows were getting bigger. He had some people working for him on the crew, and there's some sound companies that specialized. Rat Sound, which eventually became my company, was kind of their company, and all these different things were going on. But it was about hiring people, and Gary has a philosophy of hiring that I think could cross over to any business.
I have a knack for putting people together. I've in my other business as well, my smuggling business, I did that, and in the music business, I applied some of the same techniques. A business is a business, whether it's illegal or not. I gathered people around me. I wasn't afraid for a person to be smarter than me. In fact, I really enjoyed that, actually. It took some burden away from me.
And I think that's what we learned also. Never be timid. Just hire the right people for the right jobs, And it was interesting how now we're starting to get into that era. Like, the shows are getting bigger. They're going through, we're in the early 80s, 81, 82, 83. The company was growing. There was more shows going on. The bands were coming down and doing shows in areas, one of them being the Inland Empire, Pomona Valley, where I grew up. And there was two brothers out there. And this is where Gary Tovar and Paul Tollett connected. And Paul had his story of how he met, and then Gary will have his story how they met and formed this relationship that went on until, we'll talk about how the company progressed.
And Paul's a bigwig. He's running Coachella now, right?
Paul is a bigwig.
He's a monster.
But we all start somewhere.
That's
start
cool.
somewhere. And they were doing little shows like I was doing for the ski. This is where I was meeting Paul.
Right.
Because I was doing some shows for my ski team out in college.
Right.
Early 80s. And Paul and his brother, they were going to Cal Poly Pomona. So we were all in college.
We were all a gang, man.
Well, we were just starting to connect through our love of music, too.
So cool.
And then all of a sudden, I asked, I go, Paul, how did you meet Gary?
Me and my brother Perry drove down to Fender's Ballroom down in Long Beach. It was a Bad Manners show. And the Goldenvoice was looking to put on a show in Pomona and Big Audio Dynamite. And, we didn't really want him to come to Pomona because, we felt we were promoting out in Pomona and we didn't need him out there. So we're going to kind of give him some attitude. And so we go down there and I found John Fender and a guy, Ken Phoebus, and they introduced me to Gary. And I just fell in love with Gary. Perry and I did. He was just the coolest guy ever and talked all night. And it was just like, it was great. It was just immediately, he disarmed us, because he was just so great. And we just started working for him.
And I think that's where Gary was great. He like when he says disarm, he brought you down. Like he knew how to deal with people. And these guys came in hot. Now, they weren't tough guys or anything but they want to protect their turf.
Pomona.
My turf. And, and I asked Gary, what his first impressions of Paul were.
We were going to do Big Audio at Pomona. It's his home ground, so he felt kind of concerned. But I try to turn things from tiny confrontational, very tiny.
You've never been confrontational.
To hey, well, let's do this together or something. It was still my show and everything, but I wanted him to be part of it. I gave him flyers that first day, and I like Paul because he was very unassuming, and I'm drawn to people like that. I like unassuming people maybe better than really assertive people. Not that you can't be assertive and be unassuming. You can. Paul's proof of it. And it was February of '86. The Big Audio was in late March. And he worked with me for about a year as an intern, a year and some change. And because he was going to be 21 in about 4 months. So he was only 20, which is young. So I'm glad, like I was telling Kevin, I'm glad the powers that be, they were investigating me, and it was the federal government, and they take their time. They dot their I's, you know, and they cross their T's. So they were investigating for about 3 years. They were investigating me, and so I knew they were investigating me. It's your lawyers, people find out. So I had to think, what am I going to do? You know, am I going to run, which I'm not going to do? I like to stay here. So I said, Paul, I said, somebody's got to carry on this thing. If I'm not going to quit the business and run away, I'm going to keep this business going. And I had 3 years to talk with Paul, and he grew into the job. So from mid '87, when I hired him full time in July 1st of '87 until early '91. That's 3.5 years. And then I didn't go away until he was 24. So no, I'm sorry, I didn't go away until he was 25 going on 26. Okay. So I had time to ease him in slowly. We talked all the time on the way to the shows. I gave him my philosophy, always to stack the bill. Stack the bill. Stack it with the best bands you can find.
And Paul, if we go on to his history later, he certainly did that.
I think that's what we learned, you know, and Gary would be that person that would be all of a sudden like, was doing productions, but, you know, it was like, I asked Paul, like, you know, where did this education, it wasn't like, you know, now I work with students and I'm trying to train them.
Right.
How did he get his education and how did that work, you know, for him? You know, now, you know, I don't even know if he was being groomed by Gary to take over the business, but how did you get educated from Gary? And it was a very interesting little tidbit he gave me.
I was working for Gary, and I was kind of like his driver also, because we drive from the shows from Huntington Beach to LA.
He was too stoned.
And that was just gold time, you know, just to hear him talk about everything. And I swear to this day, I remember everything he said, you know, like the general feeling of, you know, kind of guidelines of how to do things. And I still use that, you know, those are what we've built all of our stuff on. You know, you and me went to Cal Poly Pomona, and then we both, you know, were under Gary. So it's like, there's a lot of similarities between you and I, you know, I'm mostly just Southern California here. You took it across the country and did all that stuff. So it's kind of two different worlds, but a lot of the same, you know, principles. And Gary definitely drilled that into us.
And it always comes back to that whole thing, you know. But I did have to ask Gary, like all of a sudden he's like talking about hiring front people and, you know, these people. And like, I'm going, Gary, like I had to ask him when he was here. I go, hey, Gary, like, why did you hire me?
I found you to be technical, and we were moving more from hardcore punk rock into like post-punk. Yes. And we didn't need as much muscle anymore. You know, I mean by muscles that hold everybody back, not to attack, to prevent from being attacked.
So Kevin, you wouldn't consider Kevin muscle, is what you're saying?
No. We didn't need him for that. We were moving on to something different. We needed.
You started to get real contracts and writers.
We needed a different situation.
All of a sudden, I found myself like falling in with Goldenvoice because I was helping another promoter in Long Beach at Fender's Ballroom who did a co-promote with Goldenvoice. And that's where I reconnected with Paul because he'd now been working for Goldenvoice. Mm-hmm. It was Motorhead. Now, Motorhead's a pretty big band playing a club at that point. And they had a big contract at Big Writers. So they decided that their production manager would be there because he did, but I would handle the technical side, deal with the band.
Right.
And they had a bunch of shows coming up. And all of a sudden, I'm like connecting with Bryan Meckelborg, who was his kind of front guy doing the stuff, and said, wow, we need, you want to do the show? They started passing off shows to me. And the person, Big Frank, who was working with them, was starting to do some other things. He was a tattoo artist, well-known and stuff.
Right.
So there was multiple shows. So I was always like, on deck if they needed someone to cover a show.
I think Gary saw his business changing, like you said. It was getting bigger, and the reason why you were on and the sound that you had to be able to, Goldenvoice had to be able to justify and say, this is the professional person that's going to marry this, promote, and handle
But then there was,
show.
if we don't, if we're going through the history of Goldenvoice, we need to address Rick Van Satten. Rick Van Satten, unfortunately, left us, for a lot of the reasons a lot of us work in the world of addiction or recovery. Rick struggled with a lot of issues and things, and maybe we could have helped Rick now if we had the tools or knew something, or maybe we couldn't have. But Rick was like, Gary liked to describe. I asked Gary, what was Rick to Paul? And he gave us a great explanation.
I needed a yin and yang, right? I needed, that's why I got Rick Van Satten. He was very aggressive. And he's a couple years older than Paul. And when you're younger, a couple years makes a difference. When we all get older, then we're all old, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're younger, a guy who's 28 and you're 25, well, that could make a difference. I put those two together, and I was hoping that they would be able to survive because I knew it was a cutthroat business. I saw Rick very smart. He got us some fantastic ticket buys. He would work some of the shows we would take. He would work the labels and just get, he would get us money, and he was relentless. And so that's why I knew. There was people that told me, oh, Paul's too young. He's not assertive. I said, he'll be fine. Not everybody has to be a raving lunatic, even though it might help sometimes. But I didn't like that approach. And I wanted somebody, not necessarily like me. I'm not no role model. I wanted him to be whoever he was, and he was. And I knew that Rick would help him. And I knew Rick might have some bumps here and there. But I put those two together, and it was one of the best things I did.
How did Paul initially feel about that?
Well, I think it was good. I think, Rick had a lot of street savvy, like L.A. Rick was involved, like with the whiskey. He was around town, so he had a street savvy. Like coming from Pomona Valley, we thought we were like street savvy. No, we were suburban kids in business, and you're coming into Hollywood, and he could deal with the club owners. The Magliaris who owned the Roxy and the whiskey, and it was it's kind of a shrewd time. And Rick was relentless. Where he called them yin and yang. Me and Rick were more like oil and water at times.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He knew how to punch my buttons. I don't think you've ever seen anyone be able to push my buttons.
No, you're pretty.
Trump could push my buttons.
Cool,
like, a tweet by Trump pushed my buttons. But like Rick on a daily, but we got a lot done. Me and Rick did a lot of shows. We opened up Alaska. We do shows together. We did a lot of stuff in Hawaii. Rick was that guy. He was an adventurer. And Paul was really solidifying the L.A. market and building his relationships with the agents and the managers, and of course that led to '93 with Pearl Jam out at the Coachella fields and stuff. But during this time, we were doing a lot of shows. I had formed my own production company at that point, Kevin Lyman Production Services. I was a contractor to Goldenvoice, but I was doing shows for other promoters. I wanted to work every day of the week, and even at Goldenvoice shows, Gary, we didn't really I didn't see Gary as much as I thought. For a while there, and he explained it to us what was going on during this period. And we're, during the, mid 80s, towards the later 80s.
I would think he's trying to keep it a little down low.
Well, let's hear what he was up to.
I didn't want to run away, but I knew I was going away, so I went through this run for your life period. It's an old show. Ben Gazzara, yeah, he's a doctor and he finds out he's dying, so he lives it up. He's got money. He's on the Riviera here and there, the Mediterranean. He's in, skiing in Switzerland. So I took that philosophy. I said, okay, I'm not going to run away, but I want to have as much fun as I can.
Yeah, he's going to party. I love Gary.
Soon. I don't know how long. So that 3.5 years allowed me to train Paul, be away, went to 80 countries during that 3.5 period, just lived it up. I knew I wasn't dying, but going to prison's like dying. People forget about you. You're out of sight, out of mind. So it's kind of like dying in a way.
There's characters in this business. Right now, it's funny because, there are people that stand like Paul Tollett, people like that, but that are attached that people go Coachella and that. But a lot of times we just hear terms, Live Nation, AEG,
right?
Spotify, these people. Gary was a personality. So when he did go to eventually jail, that we'd forget about him. When Gary Tovar touched your life, and like this next segment we're going to talk about is, of course, we talk about, Goldenvoice. Everyone knows the story about Goldenvoice, starts Coachella. Paul almost goes bankrupt. He's on the edge. His dreams are maybe going away. Rick passes away.
Wow.
And then, Rick, Paul had some friends that stepped up. Jim Garino, some people I know that came in to kind of prop it up for a moment. I'd gone off and done, Warped Tour and my other projects. Right. And then AEG absorbed them. And that's where Goldenvoice is today. So we're talking about just a few people here. We're running this company.
Right.
Now we talk, there's like a team of 100 on Coachella. There's 100 people like Golden.
This is the best story that, where how humble beginnings become these incredible stories. And that's beautiful. And I'm glad that it's all worked out. But I never thought the complexities behind it and what Gary went through, that just blows my mind.
So I thought as we're starting to go with this episode, I just wanted to ask people, some reflections on Gary. It's not last reflections because Gary's still with us. He's still very active. He's out there. I see him. You never see a person at more shows than Gary Tovar. I mean, Gary is out every night of the week.
He's a music
COVID, really, that's what I thought about. Lifetime people adjusting. But Gary Tovar, you go to a show. Gary was at every show. My wife, and everyone knows if Gary was at your show with you. Me, the last show I sat with Gary was at the Roxy. My wife sat next to him at Squeeze one night. And you always remember something he said that night to remind you. So I asked Paul some last reflections on Gary.
The crowd he hung out with, the first night I walked into the box office, Fender's Ballroom had that big box office. And I walked in there was every type of person, and it was packed in there. There was probably 6 people in this little box office. And it was like someone who looked like a school teacher at the time, someone who looked a little bit more on the, countryside or whatever. And, all these different people, all the different races. And it was like in one room, I'm like, this is Goldenvoice. It was just really interesting to see the cast of characters he had. He loved the scene so much. So it's like when he was doing making any decision, it generally was about, is this good for the music scene? It was kind of a cool mentality.
We talk about the box office a lot, and Ann was in that box office. So she kind of had the fishbowl scene. Yeah, the concert going on behind her that could be, but she'd see out in front of the box office. And many times, this was like where Gary really stood out to Ann as a person.
I don't think he ever went into it as a full business. It was always his passion. It was like, I love these bands. I love the excitement of bringing these people together. I don't think Goldenvoice was ever anything but a huge passion project for him. And then he worked it the laundering of the money and all of that made sense. But in the beginning, all of that pop money was supporting Goldenvoice. I mean, I don't think he ever went into it thinking he was going to make a ton of money. He was having fun. He was having, cool bands from Europe come over, and first time ever, he was, totally cutting edge on that level.
And Gary was known for doing certain things, I think I learned a lot from him. Like at the end of the night, you just didn't drive out. You kind of looked around the parking lots to make sure, like it didn't end until the last person got home safe or was picked up by their parents. And there was
at the top of this, we had mentioned, hey, at the time, punk rock was scary. And as it grew, and I think he was looking out for these people that were coming. He was looking out for the scene, trying to protect that scene on all levels.
And, reflected in when he did mention Bill Graham, another one of my mentors. But Gary did a few things one time, and he reminded me of something he did out in one of the parking lots one night.
We were an all-service promotion. That show you're talking about, I came outside about 2:30. That's late. The show was over at 12:30. And there's 30 kids still in the parking lot. They'd lost their ride. People left without them. Different reasons. So what I did is the phone booth was broken. So I had a phone, a portable phone in a shoebox. So I told Bryan to get the brick. We called it a brick because it was heavy. And I called 6 taxi cabs. And I put the people, first I put them in all their different regions. I put the South Bay, 5 or 6 people from the South Bay, the Valley, both valleys, San Gabriel and San Fernando, and Orange County, West Side, and all IE. I called 6 cabs, and I gave each one of them a $100 bill. And I told them, take these people as close as you can to their areas by region. And I remember Bryan asked me, what do I categorize this $600 in the budget? Miscellaneous. And I thought I was going to try to, within my power, raise the level, because I thought eventually this music would resonate forever in one way, whether it be style, whether it be the music, whether it be both. And it's come to fruition. Yes, it has.
I think it's, ultimately, it encouraged me to take that music across the country and world. But Gary was the catalyst to all this. And, how Gary impacted, now we're talking early on, earlier in the show, we were talking how Bryan met him at Nautilus and had no idea what punk rock. But, Bryan, I asked Bryan, in the same question, what impact did Gary Tovar have on a music scene?
The impact Gary had on Southern California punk rock, the music scene in general, was really, it's something that's hard to, well, you're a professor, somebody should look into that and see just what it was. The bands that he brought, the money that he put into the scene, so much of it, I don't know if you want to get into that, but so much of it was not a winning proposition. He invested a long time. We did shows for 5 years before we started turning a profit, but he changed the scene. Acts that never would have come here came here, and shows that got to be 4,000 and 5,000 and 6,000 people, in a scene that started out as 200 kids. That was all Gary. Gary did that with his personality, obviously his cash, but that energy to just, let's do another one. Let's do another one. Let's do them over there.
I think it's safe to say, because the scene required that influx of cash to get it raised up and started, to get people interested in shows, and he wasn't really interested in turning a profit so much, but was enjoying it, I would say that the face of music, clearly Coachella, would look completely different today without this man. I mean, there would be so many bands that wouldn't even exist today.
You know, and I've asked people, does Gary deserve a higher, like, recognition within our business? And to a T, everyone says yes. And I asked Graffin of Bad Religion, about, the impact of Gary Tovar. And when you're coming from an artist, that's what a lot of times, when you get this kind of comment.
I thought of him as Gary Tovar, so I didn't really know Goldenvoice Productions as a company as much as I would. I mean, it was almost like in those days, I got word, or I actually got a call from Gary. I would get word that Gary Tovar wants us to play here. It wasn't, hey, we just got a Goldenvoice offer. Now it's like you hear about the offers that you get from companies. Back then, it's just like Gary Tovar called and said you wanted to play, but really he was building his company. And yes, that was extremely influential because of the different venues that they established. So those venues were sort of I always say you can't have a scene without a venue. And having an established venue in those disparate areas of Southern Cal, I think helped to diversify the scene, especially the kind of fans that were coming into hearing about Bad Religion were coming from the suburbs and those sort of outsider venues that he established.
When Gary went away, the word spread very quickly within our community, and it was people took it hard. There was a lot. We were right in the middle of really ramping up Goldenvoice. We had I just remember we were doing 5 nights at Jane's Addiction at the Palladium. We were doing 5 nights of the Ramones at the Anson Ford Theater. It was like this company was going, and then all of a sudden, the soul of the company. Even though now I learned, and even some of the stuff I learned during this episode of learning about training Paul and all this stuff, how he set it up so it could continue, because if he wasn't as caring about this music and and this company, he could have gone away. It would have shut down in a week. Sure. It could have shut down.
And how did Paul and Rick do in that moment when Gary did?
I just remember it was a lot to do with cash flow, things like that. Right. So I know as a production company at that point, I'd say, so I did, I got everyone to go on 30 days. We would do shows and pay people. People trusted us. There was a lot of trust of Goldenvoice at that part. And it's also the music scene in LA couldn't afford to lose Gary Tovar and Goldenvoice. They were doing so many shows. They were building up a music scene. So, when you knew it was coming down, how did it feel?
When I went away, I felt bad about doing it because it took a lot of my money. I know if I hadn't done concerts, I'd be rich now. But at the same time, I enjoyed doing the music, and people have gotten older now. Now, people that gave me shit are now saying, "Oh, you're great," because they had a chance to get older and think, what did this guy do how did he mess up my life? He was good to my life. I went to this show and, I met my girlfriend. I moved here. The English bands that now live here, they came to LA and they said, well, I'm not leaving.
We're all getting to a point you kind of reflect, but man, it was such a nice time to have Gary over here.
Oh, it's great. And, and it makes me think. It really makes me reflect. And he says that hindsight is 20/20. When we think about where he was initially and in a position that would be considered extremely nefarious, but truly it's come full circle, hasn't it? Because he wasn't dealing with, hard drugs. It was pot. Now it's fully accepted now. Punk rock was considered the bad kids' music. Now it's beyond across mainstream.
Skateboarding's an Olympic sport.
Are you kidding me?
I mean, and that's the thing. It was pot, and now you have all these promoters that are coming in that are straight up saying, "I'm taking my money that I've made raising legal crop, and putting on concerts. It happens every week. There's someone who's got some extra money that wants to invest in a show. So now you could go out and actually raise funds to become a promoter if you want through a legal.
Exactly. Or you can even get somebody to sponsor your event.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I hear, if I just heard, one of our big promoters just announced a partnership with a marijuana company.
Oh, that's crazy.
So
at the end of this, Gary's gone away, but he's come back strong. He trained Paul, Rick. What is it today that Goldenvoice, when I think of it, this is a huge concert promotion. How did it end up?
Well, I think, Paul, has looked out for Gary in many ways, and that's really cool. I think, he's a consultant to them in some ways. But AEG is a massive company.
Sure.
Goldenvoice, from what I heard, has like over 100 employees. Their Coachella has over 100 employees, or more. We're talking hundreds of people. There's going to be people within that company
international phenomenon
that don't even know each other or haven't met, or maybe they do these conference calls and stuff.
So AEG acquired Goldenvoice.
Yeah, because Goldenvoice was bankrupt after pretty much the first Coachella.
Right.
So, look, Goldenvoice continues. AEG continues. There's a lot of people employed by this company, but it was really cool to do this episode where you go back to where it was run by a handful of people.
Story.
By a handful of people that kind of pulled off some amazing stuff. And I was great to be part of that. To me, that allowed me to open the doors to do everything else I did in life.
Of course.
But at this point, I'd like to give a shout out to a nonprofit, NAMI. I couldn't really decide which charity to do with this episode, but it's so relevant right now. I'd like to shout out NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Health. It's so important right now. It's going to, the next few months are going to be very important to look out for each other and look out for our friends.
Thank you for all the guests that were on today that were able to come on and share their stories.
Thank you to all the listeners for making it this far with us.
Make sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, as well as there are new things happening all the time on the website.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Facebook to get yourself an interview and be on the show.
If you want to hear more from us or our guests, subscribe to Patreon to hear more exclusive content and get a discount on our merch. Plus, a subscription to My Warped Life might make a great gift for a friend. It's only $5.
And I want to do a special thank you and shout out to Anna Parzignet for subscribing to us on Patreon.
Thank you very much. And don't forget to text us on any topics you want to hear more about at 818-863-6445.
And I'd like to thank Xavier, who's had a great summer, and now it's back to work on his new job now.
Get back to work, kid!
And Vivian, who's back from her honeymoon, and I got to say the wedding was fantastic.
3 weeks. That's a long honeymoon.
Yeah, and then I want to thank you, Tony. We've had a nice summer, been able to share some good times. I've actually had a summer.
Thank you.
And we want to thank Beata. She's got a job this summer. She's working full-time, but still hanging in here with us. And the only one that doesn't have a job but is back to school full-time.
Ooh, take it away, Diego! Back to school.